This is Narrative Elements Chapter 1, Plot. We don't spend a lot of time in my classroom talking about plot for a variety of very good reasons, one of which is you don't need me. You have seen 100,000 TV shows and movies since your birth. You have mastered plot. Just for the heck of it, let's take a quick look at an abstract picture of plot, the Freytag triangle. Call this a sneak preview. There it is. That's what Gustav Freytag in the 19th century says a plot looks like. At the beginning, situation normal, level baseline. You get to know the characters briefly, and then things start to happen. The main character wants to get something and is struggling to get it, or wants to avoid something and is struggling to avoid it, either way. But there's some kind of tension or conflict, and you watch, and stuff that happens causes more stuff to happen, and the tension rises until it reaches a climax, after which there's some kind of outcome. And it's that outcome that typically the audience has been sitting on the edge of their seat waiting to see how it turns out. For the average person, plot is the central thing in following a narrative. So you know about plots, and you don't need to be trained to see them. If anything, my typical student needs my help to stop thinking so much about plot and look at something else instead. Just because in the average narrative, plot is so straightforward, so readily graspable, low-hanging fruit, there's not that much for us to talk about in a college classroom. So, narratologists have studied plot, of course, and I'm going to give you a whirlwind recap of the last 2,000 years of the history of the study of plot. Beginning with Aristotle. Aristotle, you might say, is the first narratologist. He didn't call it that, of course, but he's the first one, or at least he's the first one whose writings we still have available now, who wrote about plot. Aristotle said plot was the most important element of drama. That may have been true for the genre he was talking about, but there have been some developments since then. Okay, Freytag, we had the sneak preview on him. I don't care if you remember all of the technical terminology that goes along with the Freytag triangle. It would probably be helpful if you could have at least a passive recognition on these terms so that you'll know when other people use them what they're talking about. And let's go back to the pictures of the Freytag triangle. Here's another one, this pretty one in color. That's got some of the Greek words in it and everything. Okay. This triangle, in contrast to the first one we looked at, is not perfectly symmetrical, which I think you will agree corresponds more to our experience in the movies, right? You wouldn't expect the climactic moment of the movie to happen right in the middle with half of the movie still to come. And if we're talking about other genres, like the modern short story, the triangle probably would be even more asymmetrical than that. So that it's, you get just a gesture in the direction of an outcome, and then boom, it's the end. So that it's more like Freytag's upside-down check mark than it is like Freytag's triangle at that point. Moving on to the 20th century, E.M. Forster, who's kind of a hero of mine, and I'm very fond of his book, Aspects of the Novel. In Aspects of the Novel, E.M. Forster invites you to consider these two, let's call them statements. A, the king died and then the queen died. B, the king died and then the queen died of grief. Okay, according to E.M. Forster, one of these is a plot, and one of these is a story. Here's your at-home quiz. Which one is which? Go ahead and pause the video if you need some time to think that over. Okay, you ready with your answer? Go ahead, shout it right out. If you're like most people, the average person thinks, well, if one is a plot and one is a story, the plot must be A, the shorter one, the king died and then the queen died, kind of the skeleton of it. And the story is the one with all the frills in it, the king died and then the queen died of grief. Forster didn't see it that way. According to him, the king died and then the queen died is a story, or as he says, just a story, only a story. It's just one event and then another event, and without any necessary connection between them. Just like a soap opera, one thing happens and then another thing happens and then another thing happens, or just like our lives, you know. The king died and then the queen died of grief has an element to it that the story, just the sequence of events, doesn't have, namely a causal connection. The queen died because of her grief over the first event. Now, I do not intend to test you on that. You don't need to remember the king died and the queen died example. And Forster's terms are a little bit idiosyncratic. But I do want you to think about the fact that the idea of causality is central to the idea of a plot. We feel cheated when we're subjected to some kind of plot where things happen just randomly, where it doesn't seem reasonable that one event, that the event which happens would have been caused by the previous event. One of the criteria that we tend to apply to a plot when deciding whether it's a good plot is whether the cause and effect seems reasonable or not. Okay. That's not the end of the narratological history of plot, of course, but that's all I feel like saying about it. Like I said before, you already understand plot well enough. We can get on with it. So what does that mean? I'm not going to test you on any of the Freytagian terms, although run your eye over them well enough that you recognize them when they come up in conversation. These are terms that you really need to have in your active vocabulary. Present action and backstory. So the present action means the events that occur as we witness them in the narrative. Witness literally in the case of a movie or a play, and witness kind of in a simulated fashion in the case of a narrative that we're reading on the page. So, but the world which is created in your short story or your novel or whatever has a past, events that we're not witnessing directly, but that we're able to infer in one way or another. The characters talk about them or whatever. And that action that preceded the chunk of the narrative which we're participating in vicariously is called the backstory. That term comes from movies, but it's extremely useful for textual analysis also. I'm going to throw in one more term that might possibly be useful for you. Diegetic level. Everybody's familiar with the idea of a story within a story, or a play within a play, where the characters in the narrative that we're looking at then begin to tell some story of their own. So then that story that's being told within the story creates its whole another universe, another story universe. And each of these levels, and you can go down any number of levels, is called a diegetic level, like in the a Scheherazade story. Frequently, a character in a story that Scheherazade is telling to the king will then begin a story, and then that character can begin a story too. So if you think of diegetic as referring to everything that is in the universe of the story. This term is also often used for analyzing movies. One of the interesting things in the movies, there's almost always some music going on. But that music is not necessarily diegetic. That is to say, the music isn't necessarily occurring in the universe in which the story is occurring. Sometimes it is. I mean, the characters could be at a disco or something, and then the music that they hear and the music that we hear is the same thing. But in a love scene, when they're walking by the lake, we hear the violins, but they don't. The music there is not diegetic. All right. So I was trying to decide whether I needed to make two different videos, one for my literature students and one for my creative writing students. I decided I do not need to. It's not going to hurt either one of you to hear about this from the other angle. So this is a caution for literature students. Don't fall into the plot pitfall, okay? It's so easy to do it. You're sitting there and you don't know what to write next on your test page. You just think, what else happened? At least you can prove you read it. Yes, a person needs to remember the plot well enough to be able to talk about it later, you know, to remember the details. But you're unlikely to get better than average grades if that's the only thing you can write about. So steer clear of plot summary. Plot should be background for you. For creative writers and plot, you have to heed Aristotle's words, and it's very unusual that a piece of literature is going to be successful and it doesn't have any kind of plot in it. But don't think that plot is going to be enough, that all you have to have is a great plot and you're going to be home free. For literary nonfiction in particular, plot is not as important or as central, but there may have to be something that stands in for plot. At least that feeling of we're getting somewhere now, or progress is occurring, or emotions are being heightened and deepened, or at least my level of understanding is increasing. You can map those feelings that you want the reader to have still onto the Freytag triangle. You have that feeling of, okay, the stakes are going up here somehow. Or John Gardner's term, profluence, that there is the sense of some kind of forward momentum, that progress is occurring. Okay, one final word of advice for creative writers. It's very easy to spend a lot of time thinking about present action, and present action can be very beautifully crafted and very, very vividly rendered. But if you don't also have backstory, your plot is going to feel thin and weak. So spend as much time thinking about backstory as you do about present action.